Hello and welcome. I'm Anisa Nawi in Moscow. This week, the media discovers the word proxy war. ISIS is suddenly not a threat, and the last Syrian ambassador to the United States is in the now. Remember that withdrawal from Afghanistan? Psych, the U.S. is delaying its full pullout from a never-ending war.
I've decided to maintain our current posture of 9,800 troops in Afghanistan through most of next year, 2016.
So America is staying in Afghanistan for now. NATO always follows suit. Russia, of course, is right here. And then there's Syria. I hope it has nothing to do with this.
This is just the latest, as you know, in what is this expanding proxy war playing out across the country.
Russia and the U.S. fighting for their interest in Syria. What a concept. That ship sailed long ago, so why is the media jumping on it now? The New York Times recently made the discovery as well, focusing on how Russia is propping up Assad and not fighting terror. All of a sudden, ISIS is not a threat. It's Russia and Assad working together to fight them. That's the real threat. And using the word proxy war explains that now. Fighting terrorists is just too simple. Which brings us back to day one.
The regime of Bashar al-Assad must come to an end.
Assad has to go.
It's time for Assad to get out of the way.
It is time for Bashar to go.
So the message to President Assad is it is time for transition, it is time for you to go.
Joining me in the now is Imad Moustapha, Syria's ambassador to China. He was the last Syrian ambassador to the United States. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to start by telling you that I spoke to Human Rights Watch head Kenneth Ross last week, and he claims he has facts proving that the Syrian government killed more civilians than ISIS. Now, he is very convinced, and he's convincing others.
Well, we have seen this before. Since the start of the crisis in Syria, we have seen the so-called human rights activists doing everything possible to undermine the Syrian state and to undermine the credibility of the Syrian government so that more and more terrorist groups can come into Syria through Turkey, being armed, financed, and supported by the Western powers, primarily the United States, France, and England, so that they can kill more and more Syrian civilians and Syrian officials, massacre our people, destroy our cities, while the so-called human rights activists are happily and blissfully trying to instigate the whole world against us. Thank you very much for every human rights activist whose charitable work has wreaked death and destruction on my country.
Why would human rights organizations, respected organizations, lie like this? It risks their reputation.
Look, I don't want to spend my time trying to explain their ulterior motives. Do you really believe that these guys who are trying to, as you have just said, whitewash ISIL and try to say, no, they are not the bad guys, the real baddies are the Syrian government? It's very clear what sort of an agenda they have. Let me tell you this, and to every human rights activist in every part of Syria in which the terrorist groups entered, whether they were called by the Western powers extreme terrorists, or whether they were called moderate terrorists, the Syrian population fled into this government-controlled areas and left the places under the control of the freedom fighters, whether they were ISIL or the other groups, almost vacant of population. So this rubbish used to be heaped on us at the early stages of the Syrian crisis. I do not believe that anyone who is thoughtful or reasonable would believe such preposterous accusations nowadays. But of course,
this rubbish,
the so-called human rights activists,
if I may,
like this that you have just mentioned,
spread
continue
not just by
lies.
Kenneth Ross. Excuse me, is being spread not just by people like Kenneth Ross. It's a popular notion. Dictator Assad murdering his own people. Give us a strong argument why Assad is not this villain painted by Western media and leaders.
Look, it's irrelevant what the Western media wants to paint us, because they have their agenda. They don't give a damn about the truth. The true fact is that since the start of this crisis in Syria, the Western powers, behind them, of course, the Western media representing their side of the story, have been financing, arming terrorists, sending them to Syria, wreaking death and destruction in my country, causing incredible pain to the Syrian people, and then they will go and take the so-called moral high ground and start lecturing us about human rights when they are the real cause of the suffering of the human people. Please don't waste the time of your audience trying to repeat and replicate their preposterous arguments that no thoughtful, decent, reasonable person will buy anymore. Enough is enough. What has been inflicted on my country is far beyond what a respectful human being will accept.
What about the idea, the notion that this is a proxy war in Syria between Russia and the United States? Is it that simple? Moscow props up the Assad government. The U.S. props up anti-government fighters. Is this a battleground between two superpowers, neither of which cares about Syria? Are the Syrians suffering because of Moscow and Washington?
Of course, this is yet another preposterous argument that can be put by so-called pundits on the Western media. I am afraid we are not addressing the serious issues now in this interview. We are just trying to refute what is already exposed as being silly arguments. This is not a proxy war between Russia and Syria. This is, you have three players trying to destroy my country. They sleep in the same bed, but they have three different dreams: the Western powers, and of course the oil-rich Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And then you have the extreme, radical, fanatic Islamic movements like ISIL, the Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda, and all the other fancy names they carry, like the Army of Islam and the Conquest Army of Islam, and all those groups. They all have one objective, which is the destruction of the Syrian state and changing the Syrian government to a different sort of government. But each one of those groups who are actually fighting today to destroy Syria have a completely different agenda and a completely different perspective towards what they want to achieve in Syria.
How much influence does Moscow have on the Syrian government? How does it work? They requested airstrikes. They're underway now. What does the exchange look like between Moscow and Damascus at the moment?
Well, it's very fortunate that we still have good friends around the world, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's the BRICS countries, whether it's Iran and other groups, of course, Venezuela, many other countries. But you are asking me particularly about Russia. What influence does Russia have? Well, at least I can tell you, this is the least. The Syrian people today feel very, very grateful towards Russia, because we really need help in these difficult times to put an end to the so-called onslaught of freedom fighters supported by the Western powers and the benighted kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the most liberal democratic emirate in the whole world, Qatar. Thank you very much for your support and friendship towards the Syrian people.
ISIS has been making gains in Syria for over a year. The request came recently for Russian airstrikes. Why did it take so long?
Well, there are many complex factors that are that should be taken into consideration. Yes, ISIL and other terrorist groups have been making progress in the past 2-3 years in Syria. Now, ISIL did not start a year ago making progress. They started 3 years ago. But at the beginning, they were only massacring and killing Syrian people. So the Western powers never paid attention. Only after they beheaded one of their American victims, Mr. Foley, and then they threatened and endangered the Kurdish enclaves in northern Syria and Iraq, did the Western powers decide to demonize ISIL. Before that, ISIL was happily prospering around Syria and Iraq, and of course the Western powers never paid any attention. Contrary to that, they were doing everything possible to undermine the Syrian Arab army that was in charge of defending our country against the plethora of terrorist groups, whether they were ISIL or the preferred and hand-picked terrorist groups of the United States of America, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar.
What about China? You, of course, are the ambassador. What role is it playing in the Syrian war? I mean, what kind of consultations are you having? Why is China choosing to be on the unpopular side of the fence, let's say, at the UN Security Council?
Well, China chose to be on the popular side of those who are decent and those who have still got a shred of morality in the way they address issues. China understands that the issue is not about changing the government of Syria. They understand that if, God forbids, the government of Syria collapses, it will not be replaced by another government. Syria will be disintegrated into small entities governed by warlords and fanatics and radical fundamentalist Islamic groups that will spread their terrorist agendas across the region. This is the difference. China, I believe, is more mature and responsible in its attitude towards the Syrian crisis than the extremely dangerous power games played by the Western powers.
Imad Moustapha, Syrian ambassador to China, the last ambassador to the United States, with us in the now from Beijing. Thanks so much.
You are welcome.
One Egyptian host is overexcited about Russia's campaign against ISIS in Syria, so much so he used a video game to demonstrate the success.
الإرهاب، الروس بيحارب الإرهاب بجد. أمريكان ساعد الإرهاب، ده الفارق. تعالوا نشوف الفرق أهو قدامنا، شوف الروس عملوا إيه.
Game over. Coming up, what do people around the world think of Syria's strategies? Obama versus Putin. Stay in the now.
Obama.
Putin's, actually.
You don't want to talk about politics.
Not my kind of thing.
We've built enough pipeline to wrap around the entire Earth once. So I'm all for pipelines. I'm all for oil production.
We want it to be safe, and we want this to be the best place to raise our daughter. This completely turns our world upside down.
The project is fully engineered and ready to go. A demand for crude oil is expected to increase quite substantially over the coming decades.
I'm scared to death.
Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want.
I was fishing with my grandfather early in the morning when the shot went off. And mind you, we were never warned about any tests being conducted. But we would see it when it goes off, and we would say, oh, there's another bomb going off. But this one was spectacular. We felt the shock, we saw the flash, and then the entire sky turned red. It was as if you were standing under a grass bowl and somebody poured blood over it. I will never forget that as long as I live.
Welcome back. I'm Anissa Naoué, and you're in the Now. Both the U.S. and Russia are bombing Syria. Both of them are bombing ISIS, but it's not teamwork. Seems like a competition, rather. Who's winning? Lori Harfinis has all you need to know.
All right, Miss England. Who do you like in Syria better, Obama or Putin?
Obama.
Why?
I just think it's got something about him. Yeah, it's definitely about him.
More Western, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We like
He's
Western.
a people's person.
Right, exactly. Unlike the Eastern.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Canada. Whose plan do you endorse in Syria, Obama's or Putin's?
Mr. Obama's.
Why?
I do not like escalation of tension anywhere in the world, and that seems to be happening right now with Mr. Putin's plan.
I don't believe in half measures that we do right now. I say we're in or out.
It sounds like you might like Mr. Putin's plan then.
I say in or out.
You know, I'm looking at it from the Israeli angle. I believe Obama more than I believe Putin, that he wants what's the best for me.
Do Australians care about what's going on in Syria?
I think that many of us care. I wish more people cared.
So whose plan do you like better, Obama's or Putin's?
Putin's, actually.
Why?
Because I think somebody needs to go in there and do what needs to be done. I don't know, I guess. I mean, Assad, we know where he is. They can contain him, right? The other people, you really can't. So deal with that.
Right.
Sort of the worst of the two evils, and then deal with the other one that you know where he is and what he's doing at all times.
Right?
I guess. I don't know. I mean...
Sounds like you do know, actually.
Yee-hoo.
We've tried to go other places and fix things, and it never worked.
No,
So,
so maybe we should let Russia take over.
well, if you ask me, I believe we should allow these countries to some degree to try to figure out within their own infrastructure on the best solutions.
You mean leave people alone?
A little bit. Why not?
No, it won't get resolved anytime soon.
Won't get resolved anytime soon. It's the Middle East.
Yeah, exactly. 1,300 years. Yeah, we're not solving it in the next 2 years.
I'll stop bugging you now.
All right.
You don't want to talk about politics.
Not my kind of thing. You wanted to talk about twerking, gladly twerk for you guys.
Survivors of CIA torture are suing two men behind the creation of the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. Suleiman Abdullah spent 5 years in custody with no charges ever leveled against him. 5 years of constant pain and suffering.
Put me water. He was beating me so much. He told me, you see, man, but here rain not finished. That he told me, the rain not finished. After that, he took me to interview. The big light took me in the face. After that, he took me again to the water. Same question come to again to water. So every day like this. He said, every day is a punishment here. Every day to me a problem for me, and better to die.
The torture report, which was released last year, mentions two psychologists hired to develop interrogation techniques for the government. Meet James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, masterminds of the CIA torture program. According to lawsuit documents, their method was based on the concept of learned helplessness, which previously had only been tested on animals.
Learned helplessness is a concept developed by psychologist Martin Seligman to describe his experiments with dogs, where he would use certain electric shocks, certain terrible experiences, so severe, so continuous, and sometimes so arbitrary that even without the electricity being implemented, even if the situation were safe, they had no capacity to assess that. They learned to be helpless.
For the first time, James Mitchell and Bruce Jesson were going to test that theory of learned helplessness on human beings. So this was human experimentation. It was their belief, once you destroyed them psychologically, they would be compliant to the interrogator's demands for information.
Such experiments have been banned since World War II. Plus, torture turned out to be ineffective, providing false or no intelligence at all. But the worst part is that those behind these techniques made a fortune, over $80 million. 6 is the number of times Putin's name was mentioned at the US Democratic debate this week, mostly by this lady.
When Putin came back in and said he was going to be president, that did change the relationship. We have to stand up to his bullying, and I think it's important, too, that the United States make it very clear to Putin that it's not acceptable for him to be in Syria, creating more chaos, bombing people on behalf of Assad.
Looks like Hillary might want to switch to the Republican Party.
Putin, 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 or Putin. Vladimir Putin.
And while I'm busy counting, some mainstream media is busy cutting.
Let me say something that may not be great politics, but I think the Secretary is right. And that is that the American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
You know? The middle class, Anderson, and let me say something about the media as well. I go around the country, talk to a whole lot of people. Middle class of this country is collapsing. We have 27 million people living in poverty. We have massive wealth and income inequality. Our trade policies have cost us millions of decent jobs. The American people want to know whether we're going to have a democracy or an oligarchy as a result of Citizens United. Enough of the emails. Let's talk about the real issues facing America.
This powerful speech met by standing ovation by the audience, arguably the best moment of the Democratic debate. Not interesting, according to MSNBC.
Tonight, I want to talk not about my emails, but about what the American people want from the next president of the United States.
Let me say this. The Secretary is right. And that is that the American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
You know, enough of the emails. Let's talk about the real issues facing America.
Forget your silly little issues. We still want to talk about emails. This week, a woman filled with hate got some love.
I was surprised to see there was only one protester because this was going to be this big national protest. She was hardcore, you know, I hate Islam, you're terrorists, you're murderers, you're Satanists. She started getting more and more tense, and I just walked toward her and I said, can I hug you? And I could feel her then kind of relaxing. I told her that I'm new and I had been attacked. I've been attacked a few times, actually, in parking lots, shopping centers, grocery store. I had to have stitches. So we walk in and everybody just started applauding her. So, well, I heard on Fox News, and we all kind of rolled our eyes, like, oh, don't get your information from there. But she said, well, I Googled it, and I Googled beheadings. Don't Google beheadings. And she said, I Googled beheadings in Islam. You can Google any two things, and you're going to find a picture. She did apologize. She said, I had no idea that people would be so nice to me, especially after me walking around with these signs. It's blowing my mind about this, how this hug has gone viral. It really amazes me. This one hug has made international news.
You've been in the Now. Thanks for watching. We now air Sundays here in RT, but you can stay in touch with us online throughout the week. We'd love to hear from you on Facebook and Twitter, so send your story ideas. And remember, it's now or never.